Hey, welcome back to The Dive. Today we're joined by Todd Harrison from CB1 Capital. But before we get into it, do me a quick favor, like, subscribe, and hit that little notification bell. Hey Todd, welcome to The Dive.
Thank you. It's Cassandra, yes?
Yes,
Nice
nice
to
to meet
meet you,
you.
Cassandra.
You too. Okay, so let's start with the question we ask all US cannabis investors. How are you forecasting the US regulatory environment playing out under Biden leadership?
Yeah, the answer probably is I don't know, because nobody really does at this point. I think it's going to be, a positive progression. Probably leads with safe unless they really, Chuck Schumer could really pull this together comprehensively, and they seem to have the people in the right places to do that. Our bull thesis is really predicated on that state level adoption and really at East Coast adoption of those dominoes falling and that driving the total addressable market. So, we're looking at those federal arbitrages very much as gravy, but certainly I think some of that's priced in. A lot of these multiples have re-rated. It's no longer growth at value, but growth at reasonable based on the existing footprint. And then, of course, we have all that adoption in front of us. But there's risk factors for sure. We're seeing some infighting in New Jersey. We're going to see it in New York. We're going to see it everywhere. There's a lot of pent up need. And there's a lot of hands in the proverbial pot. So this is par for the course. But I think the real story here is, aside from, when the institutions necessarily get that green light, when the exchanges get that green light, I think that story really is a positioning one, and the transfer of ownership from retail, Canadian retail, to U.S. institutions and U.S. retail, and that's in the process of happening right now.
When you look at a cannabis name, how do you go about your diligence?
It's a great question. We're big believers in betting on the jockey as well as the horse, and I think at this stage, that's a big part of our equation. I mean, certainly when you're looking at, let's say an MSO, we look at the footprint and the limited license states and the states that are flipping from medical to rec or adult use. But certainly that management team, their ability to operate, and we talk a lot about how beneficial that downturn was, and to really learn a lot about people and see what they do when the chips are down and when times are tough. And given all the artificial impediments that are in place for U.S. cannabis, and some of these companies that or all of these companies that were operating with the effective tax rate as high as it was, and the inability to access debt financing and all that jazz, iron sharpens iron. Coming out of this downturn, those same operators are going to really stretch their legs, and you're seeing that now. And I think that's going to continue. And why, to be honest, as I look at our book here and say, okay, well, we have our favorite, our fangs, and then we sort of paint the back of that totem pole as well. And then there are some names that you need to, investors are going to have to build a relationship with, and they need to see some demonstrated, continuity and execution. We talk a lot about this being the shooting fish in the barrel phase for U.S. cannabis and the rising tide, and we're all going to feel smart. But just as it happened in Canada, it's going to happen here, where that show me flips to, where the tell me shifts to flow me, where the tell me flips to show me, and people management is going to have to demonstrate that they're good stewards of capital and all that jazz. So we're still toward that first phase for what it's worth, and the market is my biggest concern here, the broader market. But all else being equal, I got to think that U.S. cannabis has a window, a sweet spot into earnings, and then we'll see what the show me looks like.
So you invested in the Canadian names early on. Do you still like any of the Canadian names?
Yeah, some of them. Village Farms was, it continues to be sort of our favorite, horse up there. We trade Canada. We had a really good sort of, fall into Canopy's earnings. We took a lot off, and we actually got short for a trade, and that was fun. Like ducked out, the way up and then the way down, and said, thank you very much. We took our chips, and, we'll trade Canada. Certainly, a lot of lessons learned. Took some lumps in 2007, in 2018, and 2019. It happens, but certainly coming out of that, I think that U.S. is where you want to be. Certainly, there's going to be companies up in Canada that I think are going to really, benefit from the globalization of cannabis. Different conversation, but in terms of sort of those shock absorbers for baseline bull thesis, I think you got a lot more going for you in the U.S. And the old adage is in the short term, the market's a voting machine. In the long term, the market's a weighing machine. I think investors are voting cannabis right now, but when the plumbing is fixed, I think, the weight of the US opportunity is going to be self-evident.
So, what about beverages? How big of a category do you think beverages will become?
I don't know, is the honest answer. I think that the ubiquity of the form factors is going to be what surprises a lot of people, and certainly the agility of the form factors. When you look at things like hempcrete and biodiesel fuels and things like beverages and nutraceuticals and cosmetics and vanity, pet supplements, and really the non-euphoric use cases, as we really, as we talk about 1.0 and 2.0, we're really laying in the weeds for 3.0. We're so excited for those efficacy-driven solutions and that GW model to emerge on the horizon. But that's all going to ultimately illuminate this consumer curve. And I think that consumer curve is going to be robust. Beverages will certainly be a category. I'm not going to cuff a number to sound smart, but it'll be part of the overall product mix. And I think that'll also build brand affinity and help to cannibalize the illicit market as more people find their Crest toothpaste, so to speak.
When you're looking at investing in a private operator, how do you go about your diligence there?
It's a fundamental thesis. I mean, we really have been trying to focus on the fundamental side of the equation and letting all the other stuff work for us. And again, talking about that positioning conversation and that now coming to bear, and we're seeing that in the volume flows, we're seeing that in the size of the prints, and certainly that's going to be an ongoing process. And that makes that private to public arbitrage probably the sweet spot for the cannabis space right now. And you saw all the MSOs bank up right after the Senate turned blue, raised $1 billion pretty easily, and then they're going to have to go shopping. So we foresee consolidation. We foresee big box retailers or big box CPG anyway coming in and really starting to motivate others to get involved. I think right now there's a lot of people across different industries and probably across different borders that are waiting for sort of to be that first, second mover. But we're seeing it. We're seeing all of the signs that we've been waiting to see. When somebody walked in last week and bought $100 million worth of Green Thumb on the wire, Bill Miller this morning. Or yesterday morning, as the case may be, talking about how undervalued Green Thumb is this morning. Truly registered their S1, which you need to do before you file and sell securities in the U.S. That's a necessary precursor to uplisting. So all of the signs are surrounding us. I don't, as I watch the market here in real time, I think there's a lot of late stage behavior that concerns me in the market, which, I think is probably the bigger risk to the cannabis trade right now than necessarily the cannabis fundamentals. But all of those arbitrages, all that, the plumbing, the positioning, the 280E, all of that is still in front of us, and that's exciting. But not necessarily, we're not necessarily dependent on that for the bull thesis to prove through.
So, do you think the Canadian operators currently listed on the NASDAQ and NYSE will scramble to buy the US names when the regulatory path opens up?
I don't know if they can afford them. I actually think it's going to be I might be in reverse. By the time this opens, I think the US MSOs could turn around and start, buying Canadian LPs and expanding their global footprint. So, that's how I see it, playing. The US balance sheets are just night and day in better shape than a lot of the Canadian counterparts. So, I don't know what the appetite is going to be. I'm sure you're going to see, a splintering. One of the blessing and the curse of what's about to happen in U.S. cannabis is, it's going to turn from a cottage industry into an industrial complex, and that's really good for those invested. It's also sort of sad for those of us who've built a community amongst, the pot stock community, for lack of a better word, or the cannabis industry, probably more apt. And that's going to change dramatically. The DNA of the industry is going to change as the CPG companies come in, as this sort of splinters among industries, and the usual suspects, right? It'll be tobacco, it'll be the beverage companies, the liquor companies, and it's going to be, I think, just a whole host of different CPG type of companies. Nestle, for what it's worth, has been sniffing around cannabis for a long time, and it's a natural ingredient for, I think it's going to be a ubiquitous ingredient as 2.0 plays out. And that's the part that I think people are sort of missing the mark on.
What are some of the biggest myths you hear when it comes to the cannabis or comes to cannabis investing?
Well, I think some of the biggest myths are probably, that it's a vice, that it's bad for you, that it's a gateway drug. I mean, all the things that have been propagated by the media and the government for the last 90 years, all that misinformation and falsehoods that's been, spewed to us, I think has really shaped our collective perception on what this is. But profoundly, that will be, I think, one of the more powerful driving forces going forward, because when people understand this is more likely to help solve for cancer than cause it, all those late cycle adopters are gonna come into the consumer curve. So this is a multi-year bull market. It's certainly going to be bumpy. There's certainly going to be downdrafts. I mean, it's par for the course. So as I say, I don't know the next 20 to 30%, but I'm pretty sure the next 100 to 300%. And that's how we're sort of set up to trade around core positions, try to take advantage of the volatility, and just hope that the market can hold it together long enough for this thesis to have the tailwind of the risk on appetite.
Okay, last question, Todd. You're New York based. How have the conversations changed with institutional investors recently in regards to investing in U.S. cannabis operators?
Yeah, great question. They've upticked substantially is the honest response. I mean, to understand how this slow motion perfect storm sort of came through, and it's we all know this story, but just for those who might have missed it, COVID with the jobs and the tax revenues, Black Lives Matter and the social justice, illuminating what that war on drugs really is. You had the 5-state sweep, which is really, again, pushing that fundamental thesis for us, that state level adoption. But then when the Senate turned blue in January, there weren't that many people who were set up for that. We got calls from top 5 U.S. banks, from publicly traded CPG companies, from large family offices and institutions. I mean, everybody knows that they have to participate. Very few people understand how. And again, I think this is all setting up for 2021 to be that migration of that institutional capital. But what really excites us, and we're going to be early on this as we were on this, is going to be that 3.0 component that's going to bring this home for a landing and really demonstrate that efficacious agility across a number of indications. And that's just going to really disrupt Western medicine, we think, and that part's really exciting.
Well, Todd, thank you so much for joining us on The Dive today.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate what you guys do.
And for our viewers at home, don't forget to like, subscribe, hit that little bell. We'll see you next time on The Dive to talk all things small caps.